Good afternoon. Here we are at Tom Hardy Bassoon Reeds. I'm here with my good friend Rick Yoder of the London Fields Reed Shack. And I've asked Rick to come over today because I've been getting a lot of emails, and I know Rick has too, saying how do we adjust reeds that they've bought, either from us or from other shops. And our problem as reed makers is we send out what we think is going to work on your bassoon, and sometimes things don't quite work out that way. And also a reed takes a while to settle. So once it's arrived with you, it might be in a totally different playing condition to when we tested it. So Rick, I've got some reeds. Some of them work, some of them don't.
You make reeds that don't work?
Yeah, sometimes. In fact, I have a graveyard here. Is my graveyard of reeds that I won't send out just because they're not good enough. And I teach reeds at Birmingham Conservatoire, so I go up there every month. Sometimes I give them those reeds to try, and they can make them work, and so they have a happy life, or not, as the case may be. So for you, I mean, how do you find it making reeds in terms of customers? Do they complain all the time? Or?
Of course. Reeds are inherently something to complain about, so anyone who isn't complaining about their reeds isn't paying attention from my point of view.
Yeah, I mean, it is an organic material, it does change, and that's why I suppose we kept interested in trying to make the perfect.
Right, and frankly, just about every bassoon player, myself included, blames things on the reed, whether or not the reed is to blame. So I find that sometimes people expect too much of a reed, sometimes they expect too little from a reed. But my first question when a reed isn't behaving properly and I'm playing it is, what am I doing wrong? Not what's wrong with the reed.
Right.
And after I've eliminated other factors, then I start looking at the reed and thinking about whether, in fact, that is the problem.
So today, really, what we wanted to go over for the viewer is to see, okay, you've got reeds that are not necessarily ideal, and how can you make them better? So I've had a few emails already, but I was going to just start already on the tips videos I've done. I've covered sort of closing it up and doing some work to the tip, but we'll go over some of those points again. Let's just take a working reed, or hopefully a working reed. So you get what I consider, obviously this is through a lapel mic, but we'll see what it sounds like.
So here's a question, Tom.
Yeah.
When you pick up a reed and you haven't played it in a while, or maybe you've just finished it, and you want to know whether it's an acceptable reed or
Right.
whether it needs more work, what tests do you do? What do you do off the instrument by blowing it or
Right.
looking at it?
Yeah.
And what do you do on the instrument? I noticed you just played a few notes. I've heard you play those same notes with every reed you try.
Oh, right.
What is it about that combination of notes?
Yeah, exactly. And I had a pupil say to me, "What the crow doesn't seem to make any difference." But we all talk about the crow. Oboists talk about the crow.
Right.
I mean, we're hoping for a multiphonic crow,
Right.
not a. So
Not just the peep.
Yeah. So with the reed right in our mouths, up to the first wire,
Right.
a loose embouchure, just blowing, and not forcing it.
Right.
I can tell a lot, as you can. Does it start to crow easily, or do you have to blow your brains out to get it to crow?
And on the other hand, it might do something like this if you put your lips over the wires and blow hard.
Oh yes, great.
It might
One of those.
honk.
Yeah.
I call that.
Rick calls it honk. Yeah, absolutely. You can tell, and you can tell a lot from that. So probably before I even will try a reed, if it's making that sort of noise, I'm going to be worried. But I think for most people, they're finding that once they've got the reed, it's too resistant. If they've got a reed that, not that one, just slightly too resistant. They've got a brand new box of reeds. They get all excited to do a concert. And
It requires either a little bit more air than they would like, or maybe a little bit more lip pressure than they would like, or both.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a good example. I mean, it's one that I think, oh, that's going to be a good reed. But it takes a lot of puff to get it going.
Yeah.
And if I tried to do a concert on that, I would be exhausted.
Right.
So it's like, where am I going to take that one? When am I going to start scraping it? When am I going to blow it in? Those sort of questions.
Right.
So, well, for me, I'll show you what I would do, and you can show me what you would do. I have this really, really fine sandpaper, which I showed you on another video, which is 2000 grit. It's just hardly, it's like a polishing paper. And I have a flat surface, which is a piece of stone, which came from the Bill Waterhouse estate. So it's a very well-used piece of stone. It must work.
Actually works.
And I rub about 30 degrees on the reed, up and down, a few times, just
only
polishing.
at the tip. So you're only covering maybe, you're catching about 1 millimeter.
Yeah. I'm really, really
right
covering
straight across the tip.
Yeah, and that's just my most immediate, that's my first stop.
And what does that do?
It just gets the fibers on the tip to lie down and stop sticking up like that.
And what effect does it have on the response of the reed?
It smooths out the response, makes the tonguing easier.
Does it make it respond better to air?
It makes it easier to play. So already for me, that's taken less push down it to speak.
Yeah.
And give it a try.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although still a little bit resistant to air for your taste and mine,
Yeah.
I think. It takes a bit to get it going.
Yes, it does, yeah. My question now is, would you blow that in, or are you going to scrape it straight away? Are you going to do yourself an injury, or are you going to actually start
I'd
to
probably blow it in a bit
Yeah.
myself. If you don't, you run the risk of scraping too much at this stage
Yeah.
and finding that after you've blown it in, you'd gone too far.
So if I was going to do a concert on this reed today, I would probably already either get my knife out probably and just take a little bit off all over.
All over.
All over, just because it's actually quite nice. It's just too resistant. Just going to take a few strokes and just see what it does. Just literally taking that top layer of cane off with a sharp knife. And that's when you're the magician. You do that to some pupils read and think, oh wow. It's already better, you see. I mean, how much was that? It was like a few strokes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so then I probably would leave it. So that's quite a good read though. So we're not so worried about that one. I think we're more concerned when they really don't want to work at all. Let's take this blue one. I'm going to ask Rick some questions about this.
Ha.
I've made it in a particular shape, which is a slightly longer shape, which we'll look at in a minute. It's very muffled.
It takes that
Yeah.
much air just to get the first peep out of it, the high overtones. And to get the mid-ranges and the lows at the edge of the reed vibrating, it takes far too much air for
Right.
my taste. Sometimes that's because the tip opening is too high. And you need to close it down in order to make it easier to blow. It'll respond better to air. But not this.
Yeah, that's
This
right.
is just too heavy.
And I covered that on another other tips video about that's your first step. Don't just grab the pliers and squish it. You actually want to get the blades massaged down so you're not
With your fingers.
Yes, yeah. So that
Yeah.
so that the opening looks not like the Mersey Tunnel.
It takes too much air to get it vibrating. And then when it does vibrate, I'm not hearing enough of the rattle in the crow. I'm hearing too much and not enough.
Rattle and hum. Right. Okay. Good.
And the rattle is what produces a vibrant sound,
Yeah.
a lively sound. I'm not talking about buzz. I'm talking about a sound that has a rich palette of overtones.
Right.
If you have a reed that only does that, you get a very, very muffled sort of sound when you put it on the bassoon.
Right.
If you have a reed that has a more expansive palette of overtones, you get a more lively sound on the bassoon.
Yeah. And so
Sound is
something
more,
like this, and then
for
the
my
extreme.
taste, more interesting to listen to. Everybody has their own taste, and within a range we can agree or disagree about what we like. But this reed needs more of those lower overtones vibrating.
Right. So let's make it vibrate.
then the question is, what do you do to get them to vibrate? Well, I can see by looking at it right here that there's a wall of fibers right along there. You can see the ends of the fibers sticking up there. So the back half of the reed here hasn't been trimmed as much, obviously, as the front half. Not only that, but it's not gradual enough. As the vibrations come from the tip, they're coming back to here, and then they're hitting that wall of fibers, and they can't go further. So they gradually die out, the vibrations, and that's what's happening with this reed. So I think the first thing I would do would be to smooth out that bump. And I'll show you how I do it. Everybody's got their own method of doing it. I use a file because what I'm trying to do is blend. And if you think about it, most of what you're trying to do is behind the bump because that's where there's too much wood. In front of the bump, by comparison, there's too little wood. So you're trying to blend the two together so that the slope is more gradual. So I would take a file. I would do this wet with a plaque in and the mandrel in. And I would come from behind that line where I think it's too thick and there's a bump of fibers, and I would blend it in. I would go on the other side. Again, you notice I'm not really removing a lot of wood. Then I would wash off the fibers, use a little bit of your very fine sandpaper, the same stuff, just to make it smooth again, because the file leaves somewhat of a rough surface. Then I would get my most important reed tool,
toothbrush.
the toothbrush, and I would just tidy it up. Then the plaque comes out, it comes off. Because the plaque has been in there, you and I have talked about this, this is something I do that most people don't do. I think the plaque has opened it up into an unnatural shape. So I want it to reassume its natural form. So I put it in my mouth and I suck air. I close the tip with my fingers and I suck it like that until it begins to look the way it did before I started the operation with the plaque.
Right, now what does it do?
It's a little freer.
Little freer.
No, it's significant.
Yeah, and I can
you'll
see
notice.
you've taken off the bump. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I don't know who made that one then, with a bump in it.
It's still resistant.
Yeah, but it plays. It plays much better.
But it plays. So I would
And it
continue
plays,
doing
actually.
that gradually.
Interestingly, it plays, as it's a very long reed, I made it intentionally long. I mean, as an aside, I mean, I get asked for different instruments, different makes, different crooks.
Right, as do I.
And so you're trying to provide what you think is going to work on that instrument. Sometimes I know. I did start making some very wide reeds that sounded great on this, and then I tried them on some other makes of instrument. It sounded like a Baroque bassoon, so I came back from that and realized this is a sort of long, narrow shape for people whose bassoons are quite sharp. And that,
Very useful.
and it can
Very
be.
useful.
And if the bassoon itself is very bright, I'm always talking about where are you going to put the resistance? Is the resistance going to be in the crook, in the reed, in the instrument?
Exactly.
When you with the pressure, and I'm
In
trying
your
to,
lips.
So I personally want a very open, free, where I can blow down and it's going to come to life without too much effort. But when I push it down, it's going to get louder. I don't want to be fighting with the instrument or the reed.
Exactly.
But within that, you need enough resistance so when you have to come in pianissimo, you can do it without it exploding into action. Just as an aside, let's talk about reed care, because it's something I covered in one of an earlier videos.
Yeah, very important.
Yours is you have very specific routines. I think we always have routines.
Right.
So I have my pheasant's feather. I've just been given a whole bunch of these.
No pheasants were harmed.
No
in the making
pheasants
of
were
this
harmed.
film.
But this is great because I can clean out my reed just by dragging that through after I play.
Very useful.
And I do it frequently and it keeps it clean.
Right.
And usually with pupils, they come and they're just full of, it's not even food. It's just the silt that some people have more than others of particles that once they're in the reed, this stops it vibrating. So no point
Yes.
scraping the reed if it's dirty inside.
No.
sometimes you'll see these little brushes that come for baby bottles. Sometimes they're sold for
Yep.
cleaning the instrument holes.
Yeah.
That's pretty grisly, what comes out of a reed when you clean out the butt end.
Yeah.
And then you've got you're basically got a clean reed to start with, and you know
Exactly.
that's before you start scraping it.
Right.
And that's on an older reed. So what sort of routines do you have for your...
Well, I agree with you. I think clean reeds are extremely important. And in no particular order, I tell people a number of things. First, use the toothbrush. When you get home from a gig or a rehearsal, take your reed box, take the reed you used out of the box, and put it in water again. You can do this in the basin if you like, under running water. Yes. If you don't have running water, at least put it in water and blow through the butt end very forcefully, like that. And then use the toothbrush to dry off the blades. And then leave it, at best, outside the reed case.
Right.
Or at minimum, leave your reed case open.
Yeah.
Your reed case should never be shut except when you're using it to carry a reed somewhere.
Right.
Keep it open all the time.
Some of them have holes in, some of them have...
It's really not, I don't think it's sufficient, frankly.
Right.
Yeah. But I think your idea of using a feather is very useful, instead of merely blowing through the reed like I do.
I mean, usually mine's gone in the case, and if I don't do it when I've just finished, I'm not going to open the case when I get home. That's one step more than I think most people will do. But I agree, that's ideal.
Right.
At least running it under the tap, doing something where you're keeping it clean.
I mean, my reeds for my own personal use never wear out or stop playing properly because they're dirty. Right. They stop playing properly because they're played out. They're done. They're finished. They don't want to do this anymore.
And that's the problem with the elasticity of the cane. It's just going to die eventually. It stops. Yeah. And you see that often with the wires where the cane swells and contracts easily, and then as it gets old, they start to get all loose because the cane is no longer
won't expand.
Absorbing water. It's just, the cane becomes rigid.
Yeah. Should we adjust another reed?
Yeah, let's do another reed.
Maybe something that has a different problem.
So let's take one which is just too quacky. That's always a complaint, isn't it? They get the reed and they say, well, oh, that's nice and quacky.
Oh, I like quack. Let's see.
Right.
Yeah.
So ultimately, I mean, you have some physics involved, don't you? There are some fundamentals, even though there's loads of variations within this. It is the thing which has to flap around.
Yes.
If we play a bottom B flat on the bassoon, we have to allow it to vibrate. If it's going to play a top E, it has to be able to vibrate with tiny
in a different fashion.
In a different fashion.
Yeah.
So this one on the bassoon sounds probably quite honky, I would guess. Yeah, that's the kazoo type of Tom and Jerry cartoon.
Right.
That would be.
Although, I mean, this is one point where I would say something that I think you probably have the same experience. I've almost never had a reed that had a sound that I didn't care for. That you may not care for that sound, for example. That didn't also have other problems.
Right, yeah.
And I find that if I like the way a reed plays, it will usually sound all right too, within a range.
Yeah.
This one, not only does it sound like that, but it doesn't play easily either. It's a difficult to play reed.
Yeah, and my first port of call with this is probably going to be the wires. It's probably your man.
So what makes you think that?
It's just, it's flapping about too much.
So you're going to tighten the wires
I'm going to tighten the words
to try
first,
to
just to see
calm it down.
Yeah, I can see, I've already looked at this reed and I've I've rounded the second wire already to try and get it to think it's a bit tighter in the tube. And it obviously hasn't cured it. I think this may be one that I decide is not worth the effort, but we'll just try and improve it a bit. It's easy. I think it's easier to take a stuffy reed that's just needs a bit taken off it than to take a wild thing which sounds like a goose. No offense to the geese. So I've just tightened those. I've pulled the wire up and I've twisted a quarter of a turn. I folded it back down And I've just taken my pliers, which have got a hole in it, to just make it think it's a bit, the tube is a bit rounder. I had a,
So you're not only tightening the wires, you're rounding
I
the
am,
tube as well.
I'm trying to get it to think it's a lot more resistant than it is, because it's got,
Right. Different?
it's different, but I'm not sure I'm going to like it. Let's try it. Well,
It's a nice sound, actually.
it's better. It's quite,
But I
quite
think it's
full
still
of
a little
overtones.
difficult to play.
But yes, it is difficult. Now, this is where I personally would
Stop.
stick that back in the box. But I know Rick, he's better at being
Well,
patient with the reed than I
Yeah,
am. I'll just make another one. It's easier.
So what would I do to this? I think that we call it wild. And what's wild about it is those lower pitches in the crow, the rattling sound. They're not controlled. They're flapping around and they're out of control.
Yeah.
And I think the reason is, well, to go back to a little physics, those lower pitches are produced on the edges of the tip, the wing. And you can prove that actually by chopping those edges off, making the reed very narrow. You won't get lower pitches. You only get the peep. So those are vibrating too much. So you need to do something physically to calm them down. And yeah, the way to do it, well, there are a number of things you can do. One of the first things you can do after tightening the wires, which you've done, is contrary to the way you would think, you would actually make the very edges there thinner.
Right. Yeah. That's
Although you're trying to get them to vibrate less, you're making them thinner, which some people might think, well, that'll make it vibrate more. No, it'll actually make it vibrate less. And the reason is that if the edges are thinner in the wings at the tip, when you put your embouchure on the reed, those areas will close
Yeah.
more easily.
Yeah.
And again,
Again, the file.
Again, the file, people use different ways of doing this, but I would start at the very edge. So I'm actually not going into those low wings at all, but just making the actual rail, the edge, thinner in the front, say 1/3 of the reed. So I might also take one of these things. This is a nail file from a beauty shop, but it's one of the metal sort.
Right. Yeah.
And do a little bit more of the same thing I was just doing. Again, look here, I'm not using a mandrel. I'm not using a plaque. A lot of what I do from Skinner is with just the tool, because you have some control over the reed with your fingers this way. And
Straight away,
it's calmed down somewhat.
And that wasn't much work, was it?
No, 2 minutes worth of work.
This is what's incredible, is how little can... If anything, that's gone... well, it's gone smoother, where I would be happy to take a bit more cane off.
Yes,
So
now you're at the point where you can start working on it as a reed that responds reasonably normally. And what would you do to it, like we did to the blue one, to get it to be a reed you like better?
Now, there were some questions already on the Facebook page on Tom Hardy Bassoon Reeds about, one lady asked about scraping the tip.
Yep.
And I know that often what people find is they get a new reed and they get, I'm trying to find which is hard enough, where they're getting,
Here, try
what's
that.
When they try to play E flat with the simple fingering and it goes.
Fourth
So you
D
asked
flat.
me, asked me, what's my test? So my test is usually, the first note I'm going to test is E. Because if that's going ooh, very flat, then I know I've got a too long reed, or it's too soft somewhere, or the relationship between the edges in the middle is wrong.
Wires are too loose.
Yeah, it's just flapping.
Something.
Somewhere it's flapping too much. That's probably why it's the first note I play. I go, and I go down.
And you do the arpeggio
Yeah,
to
of
test the
course.
tuning of it.
And then the next thing I want to know is if with just the forked D sharp or E flat,
Is it a little wild?
is it a little wild? Is it, if I put down
Unstable.
the B flat and the second finger of the
Does
right
it get
hand,
better?
Yeah. Is it the same pitch? Now, this bassoon is probably the most tolerant of E flat I've ever had. So
Right.
it's a little bit of I would never use a full fingering on this. But it's still a little wild.
Yeah.
So then I know that, well, this has got potential. It doesn't dip.
No.
It's making a not bad sound.
So what do you do for the E flat?
For the E flat, personally, I find that it's just off the edges of if you like, the half moon area. That there's just a bit too much cane. And now I'm watching you. I quite like this smoothing it out. But if I'm curing it for someone else,
Yeah.
they say, "Oh, I can't play E flat," and I say, "Try the simple fingering and it's about a semitone sharp." I will literally take the knife and I will take off my little dot in those triangles. Yep. So, just out of interest, and like you, as you say, you put the plaque in and it opens the reed.
Yeah.
You're sucking back through the reed. I'm just closing it
You
down.
just use your fingers.
But I'm getting it
That's
back
fine.
to where it's the shape.
Better.
Straight away is
Better.
Yeah. And for a lot of people, the next note they want to see if it's too hard is, well, does it speak down the bottom? And if you go down a D minor arpeggio, and the D's just
A little shallow and maybe a little sharp.
little sharp. Some instruments that's really distinctive.
Do you have a spot that you trim?
I have a spot which is just the channels here.
Yeah.
Is that and that's something.
So
that's
we
an
we
easy
do
fix.
similar things. For the E flat, I think your spot is correct. I might put it a little further back. Depends on how the reed. Frankly, a lot of this depends on how the reed has been made and trimmed to begin with, and it's all proportionate. And what style of profile and other trim the maker was using. The low D, I think, personally, the reason that you're trimming the channels, the reason that trimming the channels lowers the pitch and opens up that low D is that area right there. So immediately behind your E flat, forked E flat spot,
Is the low D.
I think is the low D spot.
Oh,
And
you see,
opening
you think
the
I'm just hitting that on the way down.
yeah, but I think opening the channels also probably
Yeah.
helps for other reasons as
Yeah,
well.
and it opens up the crow.
It opens up, yeah. Yeah, I would do the channels on that and see what happens.
Yeah. I'm just going to push. I'm using the knife as a plane rather than a.
You're not rocking it like
I'm not
oboe
digging-
players
yeah,
do.
I'm not digging in with a knife. I'm using it, a sharp knife, as something which is just taking off a layer of cane. And let's put a bit more lows in the crow.
Does it take less air? Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. The thing I haven't done with this one, which would be that very tip thing, because that it just feels a bit like.
Yeah.
So if I do,
I agree with you. The very tip of that is a bit thick.
yeah, it's a bit thick.
Just
We get cane from very many different plantations, and cane it grows and it's seasoned in different ways. And this is a Spanish cane. This is
Yeah.
quite open
Yeah.
pored,
yeah.
and you can take quite a lot of it.
Cane is
A whole nother
radically
subject.
different. It's
Yeah.
another subject.
So it's
the
difficult.
reed
'cause
is a living piece of vegetable, and just like you've never had two tomatoes that look alike or taste alike,
Or
or
tomatoes.
cook alike, or even a tomato. Do you say tomato? You'll never find two reeds, even from the exact same grower and crop of cane, the same vintage, the same year. You may have done everything identically. They will all be different.
Yeah, which is part of the delight. So I have 21 fresh reeds, fresh on my pins here, and they're all different. I tested them last night, and they need to be finished off, but
But
all
they were
different.
all made from the same cane,
all from the same plantation.
same method, same shape, same everything, basically.
So apart from the obvious human error of I can never make something exactly the same, they've come.
And Tom doesn't make errors. So.